Difficulty settings, the eternal debate in the gaming world. The Dark Souls of online discussions. Yeah, sorry. But seriously, have you ever stopped to think about how much impact difficulty can have in a game? Because whether or not a game lets you tweak that little setting is not just about making the game easier or harder. It actually tells you a lot about how the game was designed. And nowhere is that more obvious than with Souls games. From Software made it clear that one of their design principles would always be no difficulty settings. And in a saga as brutally hard as this one, for many players that's the whole appeal. You either get good or get fucked. But as the series gained popularity, more people wanted to try it. And suddenly, a bunch of players found themselves locked out of the experience. So, they asked for an easier game mode. And some people got really mad. But buried under all that noise, there's actually a really good question. How does difficulty shape the player experience? Why do some designers refuse to add easier options? And what can we actually learn from this? Other than the fact that people will argue about literally anything. When video games were born, difficulty was crucial. Owning games wasn't really a thing, instead you played in arcades, and those machines were not powerful, like, at all. Which means the games contained in them had to be short and simple. But they made money by making you play time and time again, so of course they had to make you lose. And it had to happen often enough for you to insert more coins, but not so often and early that you would just quit. So, little by little, every new game started perfecting difficulty, looking for that sweet spot that would get you hooked without letting you win. Space Invaders was one of the first games to play with the difficulty curve. It was something really simple. The fewer enemies on screen, the faster they moved. Pretty smart, right? Yeah, except it was not on purpose. Turns out, the developer first programmed the game to move at a specific speed, but the hardware was not powerful enough to handle 55 aliens at that speed, making the game really slow at the beginning. As you killed more and more aliens, the memory that was used to keep track of them would become available again, and could be used to speed up the aliens that were still alive, which is how they invented, or discovered, difficulty curves. But Pac-Man, which looks quite simple, may have the best difficulty system in all of the arcade era. As many of you may already know, each ghost follows a different pattern. The red ghost always chases you. The pink one tries to trap you, targeting the position 4 tiles ahead of you. The blue ghost will close future paths by going around. And the orange... he's a bit special. He will chase the player like the red ghost does, but if he gets too close, he will wander around instead of staying aggressive. These clearly distinct behaviors made the game seem smart. It was like the game was reacting to you and not the other way around. And as you played more and more, the game changed, with the ghosts becoming faster as well as your character, making it harder to control. As you beat new levels, different timers and behaviors would also change, creating a difficulty curve. Intentional this time. And these difficulty curves clearly worked. They created that perfect feeling of giving you hope, only to immediately decimate you, leaving you in that constant loop of, I was so close. Just one more time, I promise. But of course, greed got in the way. Arcade owners wanted to make more profit from each machine, and the only way to increase revenue was to make players die faster. They set an unofficial playtime of 3 minutes per coin, which many developers achieved by adding almost impossible challenges. And not in a fun way, no. Sometimes you literally had to predict what your next action was supposed to be, otherwise you would instantly die. And this, combined with the rising popularity of home consoles, led to the rapid death of the arcade scene. When games made the jump to home consoles, everything changed. Suddenly, developers weren't trying to squeeze another quarter out of you. They were trying to keep you entertained. Games didn't need to be under 3 minutes per session anymore, but they still had to work around some pretty strict hardware limitations. And the goal was to make a game last you 3 days minimum, which was easier thanks to the fact that saving was still not a thing. So, the challenge was no longer about draining your wallet, it was about keeping you hooked, while keeping it difficult enough for you to not beat it in your first, second, or even 10th try. And that's where we started to see a real shift in how difficulty was used, not just as punishment, but as design. Take Super Mario Bros. In 1985, this wasn't just a platformer, it was the platformer, a masterclass in game design. The first level is famous for a reason. It teaches you everything without a single word. You learn by doing, and more importantly, by failing safely. First, a Goomba teaches you how to jump. Then, a pit shows you how timing matters. Then come Koopas, pipes, upgrades. Each idea introduced one at a time, gradually increasing the challenge. It's a masterclass in progression. The game can stay interesting for hours, even though it's so simple you could literally play with one hand and use the other to like and subscribe. Thanks. But here, difficulty wasn't just getting harder, it was getting customizable. Enter the difficulty selection screen. There's a moment in almost every game that instantly sends me into a spiral of self-doubt, making me sweat profusely while I cry in fetal position. And no, it's not a Dark Souls boss, and it's not a jump scare, no. It's the difficulty selection screen. Difficulty settings were already a thing during the arcade era, but the concept really took off in the 90s with games like Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. Depending on which option you selected, the difficulty scaled in different ways. More enemies, faster reactions, less health, fewer pickups. Suddenly, developers were experimenting with how a game got harder, and not just whether it did. The problem is that when you're asked to pick a difficulty, there's no realistic way for you to know exactly what level you are. Older games like the two I mentioned were really simple: move and shoot. You could try a few times on an easier difficulty, switch to medium, beat the game relatively fast, and then try again on hard mode to prove yourself what a pro gamer you were. But difficulty selection screens have stayed almost untouched for the last 2 decades, while games have grown in size and complexity to a level no one could have ever imagined. So now, you buy a new game with guns in it, and since you're pretty good at shooting, you obviously pick a harder difficulty. Until you're suddenly playing a stealth mission, getting caught every 20 seconds. You decide to lower the difficulty just for this mission, manage to beat it in a few more tries, and keep playing like nothing ever happened. But the game is suddenly kinda boring. Oh, yeah, you forgot to change the difficulty again. And that right there kinda shows the core issue. Difficulty settings are deceptively simple. Pick a number, pick a word, easy, normal, hard, ultra nightmare plus. But how are you actually supposed to know what's right for you before playing the game? And most importantly, how's the game gonna change said difficulty? Some games get this right. I'm not gonna say that every game with different difficulties sucks, because I would be lying, but there are still many games that get it wrong. Because the most common practice is to boost the enemies and nerf the player for harder difficulties, or vice versa for easier ones. But turning enemies into bullet sponges is not harder, it's just boring. And killing the player with 1 or 2 hits can be fun in some games, but in most, it's yet again not harder. I mean, it is harder, but not fun harder, no, just punishing harder. Because if you're already landing every hit and dodging every enemy attack, this kind of harder difficulty will only make every fight take twice as long, not twice as much skill. Some people will now suggest hyper-customizable difficulty, where you're able to tweak every significant value for the game. Item drop chances, damage input, damage output, enemy intelligence, you name it. Because that way, every player can experience the game the way they want, right? One of my favorite games is Project Zomboid, a sandbox zombie survival where you can tweak all those values and more. And I do. I love trying new settings whenever I want to experience a specific playthrough. For example, sometimes I want to simulate an eternal winter, and I lower the temperature, make sure that no crops are growing, and deactivate the electricity altogether. But you cannot realistically ask every player to tweak every setting for every game. These hyper-customizable settings work well on sandbox games, where the experience itself involves the player interacting with the world, its rules and systems, without strict objectives or stories. But for games with a really specific intended experience, this makes no sense. Let's look at this difficulty curve, as it's one of the most common ones you will see in any game. As you can see, it starts at a pretty stable and low point, to then increase steadily and spike right here. This is the boss fight. It's supposed to be demanding and take many tries. Some people may even quit a few times before beating that part, But once you defeat the boss and come back here, you will feel proud and powerful. Because not only did you manage to beat this part, but now you're also one-shotting these enemies, which are stronger than these, but nothing compared to the boss or the enemies right before the boss. Now, imagine that someone gets frustrated and starts tweaking all those values. Their curve may suddenly look like this, where if they keep modifying the difficulty to adjust it to their level, rather than getting better, there will be no progression, making this boss fight even more frustrating, and the reward pretty much non-existent. Or even worse, it may look like this, where they give up beating the boss at the intended difficulty after 2 tries, and just change every single setting to make it easy. They may be able to beat the game, sure, but they didn't experience it. It's like watching a horror movie without sound and blocking the center of the screen just in case there's a jump scare. I'm a coward, I don't like horror movies, so I don't watch them because I don't like the way they make me feel. And if I don't like difficult games, I probably shouldn't play them. But it's time to contradict almost everything I said so far, because not all games are for everyone, I genuinely think that. But they should be accessible to as many players as possible. If you don't enjoy challenging games, then maybe you shouldn't play Dark Souls. And if you don't like platformers, you shouldn't play Super Mario Bros. That's easy to understand. But what if you enjoy those games? What if you enjoy difficult games, but you just can't? There is a limit as to how good someone can get, because people can have both physical and cognitive limitations. I, for example, have been suffering wrist problems for the past 2 years, almost 3 now. And that has greatly impacted my performance when playing games. If I have to smash buttons really fast, my wrist will start hurting, making it harder to aim my attacks. And if I have to time something, sometimes my fingers will just refuse to move and take an extra millisecond, just enough to make me lose. For example, I love Hades. It's probably my favorite roguelike ever, or up there in the top 3 at least. Slay the Spire is also really good. If you've played the game, you know about the heart-seeking bow. When you use this bow, you can keep the attack button pressed to charge the attack, after which there will be a short time window to release the button. If you release it during that time window, the attack will be way stronger. Most of the time, I've got no problem with that, for the first 30 minutes or so. After that, my wrist will start acting up, and even if I tell my fingers to move, they just won't. The same happened when I tried to replay Celeste, a game that I beat years ago. When I played it for the first time, I completed it over a weekend, playing for hours at a time. But the other day, after only a few levels, and not even the challenging ones, my fingers were once again not responding fast enough. Sometimes, I would press a key so hard while being focused on the challenge that I was then unable to tell my finger to just stop pressing. And that's obviously a big problem when it comes to playing a platformer. Or, it would have been a problem if it wasn't for the game's amazing accessibility features. As you can read on their main menu, Assist Mode allows you to modify the game's rules to reduce its difficulty. This includes options such as slowing the game speed, granting yourself invincibility or infinite stamina, and skipping chapters entirely. Celeste was designed to be a challenging but accessible game. We believe that its difficulty is essential to the experience. We recommend playing without Assist Mode for the first time. However, we understand that every player is different. If Celeste is inaccessible to you due to its difficulty, we hope that Assist Mode will allow you to still enjoy it. All games should at least try their best to be accessible, and there are many ways to make that happen. Changing the colors, aim assist, larger time windows, and yes, adding an easy mode can also make a game more accessible. I find it funny because many people talk about respecting the creator's vision whenever you mention an easy mode, only for them to get mad when Livestock P introduces difficulty levels. Like, that's the creator's vision. They want to provide a more accessible experience, which may at the same time build a bridge between casual players and more hardcore games. It's a win-win. Why would anyone complain about this? And even if the creator's vision is to make a game hard to beat, let's look at this difficulty curve again, in case we forgot. I said that it was extremely important for these difficulty curves to stay intact, as planned by the designer, right? And many people claim that modifying it with an easier game mode would break the experience. Okay, that's true. Now, what happens with the difficulty curve when you cannot control your hands properly? It goes up. What happens with the difficulty curve when you have cognitive or physical disabilities of any kind? It also goes up. See the problem? That lovely difficulty curve that you so much wanted to protect is broken. Even the smallest tweaks could make Souls games way more accessible. For example, they could reduce the amount of time you're logged when you start an animation. That way, if you either mistimed or accidentally started an action because of, let's say, spasms, you would still be able to cancel that action and move away, instead of seeing your character die with nothing you can do about it. They could also slow down enemy animations, leaving a larger time window for people with cognitive or visual impairments to react. Such small changes can make a huge difference. And if your only argument against these easier and more accessible modes is Git Good, I got something for you. Many people excuse Dark Souls from adding accessibility features because it's the game. It's supposed to be difficult. But if that's really the point, why don't you try playing with the same limitations disabled players face? If you don't want people who take longer to react for whatever reason, like me, to have an easy mode, why don't you play with extra input lag to experience the same intended difficulty we have to face? The best solution, in my opinion, is for games to be designed around the intended difficulty, hopefully the hardest one, maybe leaving room for an extra challenge mode, because toning down the difficulty while keeping the game interesting is way more simple than making it harder when it's designed to be easy. So, adding an easy or accessible mode to Dark Souls, just like to Lies of P, would not affect anyone negatively. It wouldn't alter the experience. I do think, however, that these settings shouldn't be the first thing you see when loading a game. I think it's better for the player to experience at least the tutorial before having to face the big question of which difficulty level to pick. But there's an even better way to handle difficulty, at least for most games. One that almost everyone was happy with, and that's obviously adaptive difficulty. Adaptive difficulty is a system where the game adapts the difficulty in real time based on the player's performance. Instead of asking you upfront whether you want easy, normal, or hard, it watches how you play, tracking things like how often you die, how fast you progress, how accurate you are when shooting, and it reacts accordingly. This isn't a new concept. Some of the best-selling and most beloved games of all time already use adaptive difficulty. Resident Evil 4, for example, will make enemies deal less damage and change their behavior, or drop better items if you're dying a lot. Left 4 Dead has the AI Director, a system that controls the enemies, changing multiple factors depending on how well your squad is doing. But what I think is the most important part of adaptive difficulty, and the reason why it works so well, is that most people don't notice it. Gamers have pretty big egos. If we feel like we are being treated like babies, we will get mad. But if we die a lot, we will also get mad. And that's the beauty of invisible adaptive difficulty. It doesn't break the immersion, it doesn't insult you, it doesn't place you in a box that says, this person needs help. It just makes sure the game continues to be fun. Because really, fun is the point. Not frustration, not elitism, not gatekeeping, just fun. Of course, adaptive difficulty isn't perfect. It can be tricky to design well, and if you're not careful, it can feel erratic or unbalanced. It can also backfire. Some players want a consistent challenge level to measure themselves against. For this reason, many people ask for adaptive difficulty to be just another option you can turn on and off. And I kinda agree, but I think that it should be relatively hidden, because most people won't really notice this help from the game. I've seen YouTubers complaining about Resident Evil 4 Remake because of the adaptive difficulty, which made them feel dumb and like they were being treated like babies. But then, they played other games that have similar systems, and suddenly, it wasn't a problem. Why? Because they didn't know they were being helped. Ignorance can be bliss after all. So, what's the perfect difficulty system? Well, it depends. But that doesn't mean we cannot have a framework to work with. First, we need to understand the type of game we're talking about. If it's a sandbox or simulation game like Project Zomboid or Ark, then yes, go wild with the ultra-customizable settings. Let players fine-tune every detail, because the joy comes from bending the world to your will. But for more traditional or narrative-driven games, there's a better approach. Start by throwing the player into the intended experience, without asking upfront which difficulty they want. Let them feel the world, the tone, the rhythm. Then, at the right time, maybe after a tutorial or a key milestone, let them know that difficulty options exist and can be changed. Don't shame them, don't pressure them. Most players will stick with the default, but even if they don't, that's okay. These difficulty settings should be available at all times, but not so easily accessible that the player may be tempted to change them constantly. I would personally divide the difficulty menu into two. The first part should be the basic difficulty selection screen, where they get to pick between the pre-made difficulties. And please, add descriptions to each of them and say which is the intended one. Then, there should be an advanced options button to tweak specific values. This is completely optional, but for games that may combine really different mechanics like shooting and puzzles and parkour, it's a really nice touch. From there, depending on the game, we could consider a light touch of adaptive difficulty. Something subtle and invisible, enough to prevent frustration, not to erase challenge. And finally, accessibility isn't optional, at least not in big budget games. Even if you don't want to create a dedicated easy mode, you should at least support the most common needs. Readable UI, colorblind options, remappable controls, audio cues, larger subtitles, etc. These aren't difficulty settings, they are respect, they are empathy, and often they're incredibly easy to implement. If you're working on a AAA game and you skip these, you're just being lazy. We obviously cannot ask the same thing from indie games. As a developer myself, I know how time-consuming it can be for a single person to implement these things. But even the smallest changes can make a big difference. The perfect difficulty system is not a one-size-fits-all. It's flexible, it's thoughtful, and above all, it's respectful. Not just to the player's skill, but to their time, their limitations, and their desire to play the game on their terms. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Not proving something, not gatekeeping, just having fun. Oh, you're still there? Then you should probably join my Discord, link in the description, and check this video next. See ya!